This is Season 3, Episode 10 of my modular journey, and today we're going to take a look at the Doepfer A-111-6 miniature synthesizer voice. That's quite a name. I picked up the A-111-6 also back in October of 2022 with the last batch of Doepfer stuff. It cost around $222 US, and for a description, this is going to take a while, so sit back and relax. Some call this a mini SH-101 in a box, and it can also be referred to as a slimmed version of the Doepfer A-111-5 mini synthesizer voice. There's a lot of power behind this tiny module, so let's go over the feature list, and feel free to follow along in the manual, which I will link down in the description. I'm not going to sit here holding this because that would be ridiculous. Hopefully you can still see the panel. Now first off, this is an entire voice, meaning it has a VCO, VCF, VCA, it even has an envelope generator and a bunch of modulation points, so it's a full voice, whereas I might have to use like chainsaw into a Belgrade, into a VCA with attenuators, ornament and crime or something to do envelopes on the VCA. So you see, there's like 4 modules you would normally have to use to do this, but it's all in this one module. That's why this is going to be a little longer than I had hoped. So let's start up here at the top. The VCO is a triangle core VCO with a range of around 32 Hz up to 16 kilohertz. There's a tune knob up here which manually sets the tuning, and it has a range based on the JP8 jumper on the back. We'll talk about jumpers later. The oct switch here in the center has a quick set, of course, of 0 offset, or you can add an octave by going up 1. You can subtract an octave by going down 1. So that's similar to like on the quad VCO over here with these switches. There is a mod jack down here at the bottom, which receives an incoming CV to modulate either Pulsewidth or FM based on the destination switch, which is right here. And it can be attenuated using the associated mod knob right here. There is also a Pulsewidth knob here, which manually sets the pulse width or the offset using the modulations as mentioned above. The mod jack will do pulse width modulation, so you can modulate the pulse width based on where this pulse width is actually set, or you can use FM down here for the mod jack. It'll cause kind of like a vibrato effect based again on how much attenuation is set to on the modulation knob here. The next section is the wave section, which has a sawtooth at turn it up for a sawtooth, turn it down for triangle, or you can turn it off entirely, and we'll talk about the self-oscillating resonance later. The waveform is a sum of the waveforms chosen by this switch and the rectangle of course being pulse width. Took me a while to figure that one out. So to turn off this rectangle part of the waveform, you just turn pulse width all the way down or all the way up where it's outside of its range and it will not be generating pulse width anymore. And then of course there is the 1 volt per octave CV input here, which I would normally use for pitches. But an interesting note about this CV in jack is on the back there are jumpers, which we're going to talk about a little bit more in detail in the jumper section. But for a quick review, jumper 5 and 6 will enable a busing of this CV jack to either the VCO or the VCF differently than just doing pitches. So next up is the balance knob here, which is actually kind of neat. The manual says that this unit is made up of 2 VCAs, controlled by the sum of the manual balance control here and the balance CV input. The audio for VCA1 is internally hardwired to the VCO output, and the audio for VCA2 comes from this external jack down here, which we'll also talk about in a moment. Boy, there's a lot of things to talk about in a moment. The output of this balance is then fed into the VCF. So this balance knob is a mixer between the internal VCO and the external audio source. The CV balance jack here is how to modulate balance with an external CV. Range is 0 volts to 5 volts, so does this mean that 2.5 volts is the center? I don't know. We'll have to experiment with that too. And then finally, there is an external in here, and this jack simply feeds into the dual VCAs as an external audio source to then be blended, mixed, and modulated using balance and CV balance options. But here's the cool part about this whole balance feature here, is if there is no external in signal coming in, meaning this jack is unjacked, the circuit is normal to the internal VCO, sub-octave of frequency divided by 2, or a rectangle that is half the frequency of the VCO, which means that you get a built-in sub-oscillator if you're not using an external in for other purposes. And in my opinion, that's actually what makes this module sound so badass, and maybe where it gets its mini SH101 title. The VCF is the onboard filter, and it is a 24 decibel per octave low-pass filter. The frequency knob, of course, is the cutoff frequency amount. FM1 is the frequency modulation depth as an attenuator tied to VCF FM1 down here. This is also normal to an internal envelope, so the VC FM1 CV can control the modulation depth of the internal envelope that is then applied to the filter. I know it sounds like a lot of words, but I think it basically, and I'm literally reading from the manual. So what this means is you stick a CV in here and you attenuate the amount of CV being applied to the VCF here. At least I think that's right. FM2, there's no knob for FM2 because, like in most Doepfer filters that I've played with at least, there are two modulation sources. One of them is attenuated, the other one is not. So this second one here, VCFM2, is the second CV input for the VCF without an attenuator. This jack can be normaled to the 1 volt per octave jack of the VCO if the jumper 10 VCF frequency follows VCO is set. Whew, there is a lot to this module, holy smokes. And then of course, we have our resonance knob here. This filter can self-oscillate. So if you turn off the waveform here, meaning it's not sawtooth and it's not triangle, and you have Pulsewidth rectangle turned all the way down, and then you crank resonance all the way up, you then get a fourth waveform out of this module, which is of course a sine wave. And according to the manual, you can send tracking in, like volt per octave tracking, in through the VCF FM2 jack here, because this is unattenuated. And again, the manual says it's not as accurate as the VCO, but Doepfer proudly states it is much better than most other filters. The manual states that there's an 11 octave frequency range of 10 hertz all the way up to 20,000 hertz. So moving on to the VCA, this circuit was a little odd to me because I couldn't figure out how an ADSR envelope could be tuned in with only 2 knobs, but now I get it, so let's talk about that. So first up is the gain knob. This is like any other envelope circuit. This is the initial gain. So if you turn up the gain knob, you're bypassing the envelope circuitry. The switch here has an off position and a envelope position at the top and a gate position at the bottom. Talking about the center, the off position, this causes the VCA to not be controlled by either gate nor envelope, but instead the VCA loudness has to be controlled by the actual gain knob here. I guess a use case for that might be drones. You set up a sound that's a drone and you want it to drone always, so you just turn up the gain knob. The gate setting, if you switch the switch down, puts the VCA in gate mode, and the VCA is controlled by an incoming gate signal via the gate jack. By factory default, this will lead to pops and clicks as the rising edge of the gate is instantaneous. So to avoid these clicks, there is, you guessed it, a jumper on the back to cause the gate jack to implement a slight slew via JP9, which again, we'll talk about later. This slew is only internal to the VCA and does not affect the incoming gate signal. Then of course we have our out jack down here, which is of course the mono audio out at the end of the chain, which is your typical VCO, VCF, VCA, boom, out. Oh, you know what? I didn't write anything about the envelope switch. All right, so let me wing it here. If you put the switch into envelope mode upwards, then the VCA is controlled by its internal envelope, which we'll now talk about. So this is another interesting part of this module. The circuit is comprised of the following components. There is a gate input CV sending in the gate trigger to start an envelope or open or close the VCA. With VCA in envelope mode, we have an attack knob here, which is the knob that manually controls the attack segment of your envelope, the rise, and then we have a DR knob over on the other side, which manually controls the decay and release segments of the envelope. Note that these two are controlled together, so the longer the decay time, the longer the release time together. The env switch here, which is the envelope switch, selects the shape of the envelope that's to be applied, that being attack decay, sustain release, or attack release. What I couldn't grasp before, but now I understand, is that in ADSR mode, because there's not 4 knobs, the sustain level of the envelope is internally hard set to around 50%. That was the missing thing I didn't understand. So the attack would determine the rise time, the decay of the DR would determine the decay time, and then sustain is set at 50% of whatever its level is. And then the release, of course, would determine the release time. Now the envelope jack here is not an input. This is actually an output, which I did not know until writing up this script a few months back. The envelope is an output, which means whatever the shape is that you're setting up this envelope, I think including its gate and triggering, you can take this out of here to a VCA, another VCA CV source. So you can cause another VCA or another module to have the same envelope shape as the A-111-6. So that's kind of neat. That's something I've never done before. Maybe we'll try that. And finally, there is, way down here at the bottom, you can see there's a CVT jack. CVT. It's an oddly named jack, but it stands for CV timing control over the envelope. The behavior of incoming CV to this jack is set using two different jumpers on the back, jumper 3 and 4, which change the timing of the attack or decay release accordingly. Again, I'll talk more about that in the jumper section. So for this module, the attack time is between 1 millisecond and 5 seconds, and the decay release time range is from 1 millisecond to around 15 seconds. However, both of these can be extended using the aforementioned CVT jack and jumpers. So for anyone who too long didn't read and jumped right to the summary section here, here's just a quick review top to bottom. We have a triangle saw waveform. We have Pulsewidth modulation options. We have FM modulation options. We have a sub-oscillator in the balance or external audio that can be processed with the balance circuit. We have a filter which can self-oscillate. We have an FM modulation source from VCF FM1 or FM2. And then we have a VCA, which can be an enveloped VCA or a gated VCA. And then we have an envelope generator. Then we have a little envelope generator down here at the bottom, which can also be ported out to something else. Holy crap, that's a lot of stuff to be packed into this little tiny module here. That's a lot of stuff. So this will be a good place for me to tell you why I chose the A-111-6. Because the only other full voice I have is Plaits here, as far as having a VCO, filtering, enveloping all built in, VCA all built in. So I wanted to try something different, less complex than Plaits, because Plaits is pretty complex to set up and its sound sources are pretty complex. I wanted something simple and analog like sawtooth, triangle, rectangle, pulse width, and sine. Plus, you all know I love Doepfer gear, and the couple of demonstrations I saw on this, it sounded really great. When I got it, of course, it didn't sound that great because I didn't know what I was doing. but I think now I know I have a better idea. So also at $222, this seemed like a no-brainer to add another voice that is in a small package to my rack for my drones. It's a nice, compact, full voice in one module. I can see using this as a drone machine because its low end sounds fabulous, rather than taking 3 or 4 modules, as I talked about earlier, to route up a drone voice. I can simply set the A-111-6 up and open its gain and let it yowl. I can also use it as a melody ripper, either using arpeggiators or something like the meloDICER. Then setting up some modulations with Pulsewidth modulation, vibrato, or whatever. In the end, it is a good sounding module, and as long as I don't have to touch anything, we're good. So let's talk about the jumpers on this. Normally I don't talk about jumpers because I don't care for jumpers necessarily, although I do enjoy the reconfigurability of Doepfer modules based on their jumper settings. What this means is the same module can be changed to behave completely differently based on some jumper settings, like in the case of the A135-2 over here that can go from 4 single channels to 2 stereo channels just by changing a couple of jumpers. So that part I think is pretty neat. What I probably need to do is get clever and come up with some kind of a little breakout switch panel that sits next to these modules with tons of jumpers, but this one has tons of jumpers. So let's talk about these real quick. I'm going to flip this around. So it's still faced upward. Let's turn this around. You can find this documentation in the same manual on Doepfer's site with a link to the jumper settings that's in that document. So the first one I'll talk about, of course, is JP8, and this is poorly labeled because it's, of course, written on the side you don't look at. But way down here, can you even see that? Here it says tuning range. Trust me, it says tuning range right there. So with this jumper in place, the voltage range of this tuning knob is -2 volts or plus 2 volts, like a coarse tuning. But if you want to do finer tuning, you would pull this jumper off, and now it is a half a volt. It's a half a volt down or a half a volt up, which is, of course, half an octave for much finer tuning. Now the CVT jack down here, as we talked about a moment ago, is the attack, decay, release timing. And on the back again are these 2 jumpers right here. This is jumper 3 and jumper 4. If jumper 3 is set to the left position, then a positive voltage coming into CVT will increase the attack time. If the jumpers move to the right position, the positive voltage will decrease the attack time. And the same is true for jumper 4, but the jumper 4 has to do with the decay and release time. Again, on the left, the positive voltage increases decay release, and on the right, a positive voltage decreases. I think this is because this is a unipolar module. I didn't see anything written about that in the documents, but I didn't catch anything being a negative voltage on this, so that's probably why they have to have these settings to have a positive voltage do 2 different things. All right, so next up is this blob of jumpers down here, which is JP 5, 6, and 7. So the 5, 6, and 7, this is going to be enabled or disabled. So with JP5 enabled, it takes this volt per octave, will control the VCO for like pitches. If JP6 is enabled, then the CV coming in here will also control the frequency of the VCF. So then JP7 here, if this is enabled, it actually takes the CV coming in here and applies it to the envelope gate. That's what the manual says. I don't really know what that means. So let's look at the last 2. I think these are the last 2. And that is these 2 on the side here, which by factory default, these are enabled. But JP9 is a gate slew. And that's the thing I was talking about, where if you put the module in gate mode and send a rising edge gate into this, meaning it'll go from 0 to full instantly. And that's the clicking and popping that they say might occur. So what they did is they just added this little circuit in here where if you do jump this, if you put the jumper on, then it adds like a millisecond of a slew or something pretty slow internally to just kind of take the edge off of those rising gates. And then the last one here is JP10, which is a VCF follow, which I think means voltage applied to the volt per octave here, the CV in, gets applied to the VCFM2 circuit, which they're calling VCF follow. And again, I don't know what that really means in words. Let's hear what it sounds like when we get it turned on. But look how deep this is. This is really deep, and right here on the Behringer case is a big blob of plastic. All right, let's get some power going here. I'm going to turn on the sequencer rack. Because again, I think I'm going to use data. All right, let's pretend we're at C4. So with that jumper off for tuning, which was JP8, so with that turned off, we have, let's see if I can get my fat hand out of the way, we have half a volt down. So this is for much more precise tuning. If we put that jumper back on, yeah, that's really loose. Loosey-goosey. All right, let's get our power back. All right, so with the jumper on, JP8 on, we can now tune, I think it's a full octave up. Or pretty close. Just looks like it's just shy of a full octave. Yeah, so it's not quite a full octave. It's actually only about 9 steps. So I don't know. I'm having to use an offset on my attenuator to even get it to the C. Otherwise, I think default in the center is something weird like F sharp. And all the way down, it still doesn't go to C, which I like tuning everything to C. But anyway, So that's just one of the small things that I did not like about this module, is that tuning it seems to be a real bitch. For a generic walkthrough of the sounds, let's go ahead and get this up. Let me raise my levels. Let's look at our sawtooth wave here. And of course the filter, the frequency cutoff. Looks a little hairy, doesn't it? I'm not sure what that means on data. Switching it down to the triangle. And then here we have our triangle and of course our cutoff. Let me raise my gain just a bit. All right, and then we have this Pulsewidth circuit over here. This is that little rectangle we were talking about. I'm having some trouble with my sausage hands, my big meaty hands getting in here and bumping all my knobs. So I'm just gonna run through this real quick because I'm actually getting bored of this. So let's take a look at Pulsewidth on the triangle. Looks kind of like this. Sounds kind of like this. So that's pretty neat. Let's go to the saw. Which of course is the one that sounds great to me. Then we have our filter. Get some resonance. That sounds pretty good. Let me get my invisible hands in here. I'm going to grab a couple of sines out of Batumi. Make them slow, make them, well, let's not attenuate them, let's make them full. Let's see what I got here. All right, so if I wanted to modulate, let me stick the first one into the mod jack. Turn up our gain. So this part isn't going to sound very good, and it's not the part that I love the most of this module, but I just wanted to show Pulsewidth modulation real quick. If we turn the modulation down to FM, we get a pitch modulation. Turn that into a vibrato by making it faster. And making it very slight. Sounds pretty weird. Alright, so let's grab another. Let's grab another modulation source here and go into frequency. FM1, raise the rate, and I'm going to bring up the attenuation here. So if the first one is vibrato, this one would be, what, tremolo? Alright, I'm going to take the third modulation and put it into FM2, which again is unattenuated. So whatever this is voltage that's coming in is changing the frequency while the other one is still modulating slightly. All right, that was kind of boring. So far I've been using just the initial gain so you could hear the module, but now I'm going to plug in something to trigger the attack decay envelope. I want somebody making melodies, so let's use meloDICER. All right, so I patched in meloDICER here real quick to control pitches and the gate. So now you can see the gate being controlled here. Let's turn up the volume. I only have one note turned up, so let's turn up a couple more. So this is meloDICER just pooping out some melodies for us. Let me raise the range so it doesn't sound so bassy. So now it's in envelope mode. And here's our attack. Let me turn up my decay so it sticks around for a moment. So now watch on data here, whenever you see a gate come in, that's when you should hear a note. And the attack is pretty short. So this is just using the attack decay shape. You know what's missing? Reverb. Reverb always makes things sound better, doesn't it? So this is now just the voice. Oops, I knocked it out of tune. If I turn down the octave selector, turn it down again, now it's a lower one. Then if I bring in the sub now, all right, so now we got a nice little bassy line running here. Boom, boom, boom. I'll throw in the sawtooth. Let's add some Pulsewidth modulation using the Pulse mod here down here. So this is kind of when this module starts sounding like I would probably want to use it, and that is with a nice big fat bottom end, because you know how much I love a big bottom. And not necessarily melodies like this. Let me slow it down. So I can raise the release so it sticks around for a little while. And the Pulsewidth modulation kind of sweeping in there. Let me add another modulation source for the frequency. Make a longer attack. So all on its own, it sounds pretty nice. Let me wire up something else real quick. So what I do have here is I have Plaits kind of just humming out a low note, right? All right, so what I want to do is I'm going to put level from Plaits into this envelope here, because I want it to envelope the same as the A-111-6. So now its envelope is coming out and controlling Plaits' level. That's kind of like the last neat thing I wanted to show, was the fact that you can use the module's envelope to affect another module. And I think that's pretty cool. Alright, so I think I'm just going to wrap it up here because this is a really long episode. I didn't mean for one module to take up as much time as this did, but I did want to talk about how much stuff is packed into this module onto its interface, how extensible it is by messing with its jumpers on the back, which I'm not going to go into anymore in this because this is already going too long. And then, of course, just how you can modulate it and make a really nice sound coming out of it. Or just as a drone. We'll wrap it up here. This has been Season 3, Episode 10 of my modular journey, featuring the Doepfer A-111-6 miniature synthesizer voice, and the last Doepfer module in my collection. We can finally move on to something else. And with that, I'll just play a little jam to take us out. All right, that's about enough of that.